the day. Yes,
Oh,
by the way,
sorry.
we're being recorded and Zoom will let you know. So we record every session so that people can go back and watch later as they wish, or pass on to others who weren't able to be there in person. So yeah, I'm really glad to welcome our guest host for the day, Carrie Chappell, a good friend of mine that I knew from my days living in Paris, and who she still continues to live in Paris and is joining us from there. A really wonderful and generous and thoughtful and insightful person. And on top of that, an incredible poet and a real shaper of creative community, it's a real gift to have you here today. To give a brief bio, she has had publications in the Nashville Review, in Swim, in, one moment, let me pull up the full list, Rita Vida and Yamasi of her poetry. She also has lyric and book essays that have been published in The Rumpus, in Diagram, Fanzine, the ILO Review, The Rupture, and Xavier Review. She's the poetry editor for Sundog Lit. She has been recently appointed as of September 2019 as an English lecturer at Cergy Paris Université. So congratulations, Carrie. And even more, she is the founder of Verse of April, which for the past 5-6 years, since 2015, has been a kind of way of digitally anthologizing this kind of care and appreciation and homage to the poets that have inspired us. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic on to you, Carrie. Really wonderful to have you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Marissa. It's a silent little, like the Paris windows Malik was trying to show us. Thank you, Marissa, and thank you to Hannah and Rachel for, well, I guess, I don't know if that's the entirety of the Manderley collective, but it's really exciting, I think, for Verse of April to be invited by you to have this evening where we can also talk to some of our past contributors in a more intimate way, and I guess a sort of deepened way than what maybe the sort of surface of the project is. This is really a night devoted to literary homage, yes, which is very important to Verse of April, but also to ancestry, which I think kind of then explodes and expands to call on maybe homelands and other communities, and perhaps I won't give away too much of what I know might be coming later from certain guests, but even other spaces that are important to us when we create. I just wanted to say maybe two things about Verse of April. You're right, Marissa, it was founded in 2015. And I guess if I want to make it really romantic, it was founded under the rooftops of Paris in a really tiny room next to a bathtub where I could hear my neighbor making his bodily functions. But the idea was that I wanted to, I was a year and maybe some months out of my own M.F.A. experience, and I think I was hesitant to say it, but quite burnt out on the literary communities that I had been participating in the United States. I wasn't really mad at them so much as just tired. And I was a little bit tired of American poetry, I guess, in a sense. So hello, American poets. But I wanted, in two ways, I wanted to open my own perspective. And then I thought I wouldn't maybe be the only one benefiting from this, but to talk to people about international poets in the month of April, so still searching a connection with the United States, but really trying to not only feature American writers about American poets, but looking beyond. The collection has inevitably included more American people talking about American poets than any other nationality or other literary culture. But that was one of the motivations, was for it to be an international digital anthology of homage to the poets and the poem. The other important first or sort of founding idea of Verse of April was also, I guess, motivated by a diminishing interest in the M.F.A. culture that I had come from. I was just really tired of it. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't only talking to other poets about poetry. I felt like my worldview of poetry had gotten very closed, and I had benefited from that in uncountable ways. But I was also thinking I'm missing other important connections with visual art, with musicians, with people who may not even be in the arts at all, but still carrying poetry with them somehow. So we've had in the collection a variety of people from different professions, more writers than anything, but some historians, administrative workers, musicians, athletes. And it's been interesting to see among the literary people who chime in, how other people outside of poetry react to some of these broad questions that the profile asks. Without going on for much longer, with Verse of April, I want to get to the guest tonight. We have an international cast of 6 writers and 6 past contributors to Verse of April. We're going to start with a poet from Birmingham, Alabama, and this is Ashley M. Jones. Ashley M. Jones is the executive director and I think founder of Magic City Poetry Festival, which has this year unfortunately not been able to have its April festival, but I believe it's postponed for a later date. She's also the author of 2 poetry collections, Magic City Gospel and Dark Thing. And I don't know if I unmute Ashley or if she unmutes herself, but I'd like to welcome her to start us talking about or going through her own sort of point with literary ancestry and homage.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carrie. And thank you, Marissa, and the other team members whose names you listed and which I have already forgotten. My memory is terrible, but thank you to everybody for putting this together. It's really great to be here with you from Birmingham, Alabama. And so I think, Carrie, am I just to read the poems first and then we talk?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. So today I'm going to be talking about Lucille Clifton and Black women and all of the connections that I find in those entities. Lucille Clifton is my most favorite poet of all time. There will never be another poet ever that I love more than Lucille Clifton. Unless I have a child who is a poet, in which case I will have to love Lucille Clifton, but right now she's it.
Lucy.
Been sort of a guiding light for me throughout my literary journey. So I want to start with a poem by her called Black Women. America made us heroines, not wives. We learned the tricks to keep the race together, but had to leave our men to find themselves, and now they damn what they cannot forgive. Even old Massa's son lives in a dream, remembering the lie we made him love. America made us heroines, not wives. We hid our ladiness to save our lives. So that poem has always sort of stuck with me since I read it, because I had never really seen a piece explain so exactly what I felt about being a Black woman in America. And it's a short poem. It's very small, and that's a Clifton, hallmark. She doesn't really tarry on the page, or tarry, is that like a Southern word? She doesn't linger on the page. I forget this is an international let me not be too Bama, but she has very brief poems, and her language is very exact and chosen very carefully. And like I said, when I read this piece, I thought, okay, this is everything I've ever wanted to say to people about what it feels like to be a Black woman living in the South and living in America, or even the Western world at large. Like, I feel like she just gets at it so perfectly. And so I use this poem as the basis for a golden shovel that I wrote, and I won't waste my reading time spend my reading time here explaining what the golden shovel is exactly, but it's a form that was invented by Terrence Hayes, and it kind of forces the writer to be in conversation with another poet because their words are in the poem. And so this poem was commissioned for a book called Southern Women, and the editor asked me to write answering the question, what does it mean to be a Southern woman? And so this is the poem that I wrote, The Golden Shovel, after Black women. I cannot talk about the South without talking about Black women. My grandmothers made America. made the fibers that made us warm, made us invincible, heroines. To tell you who they are, I must start with who they are not. Servants, kitchen-bound mammies, silently obedient wives. We can't, in our modern comforts, imagine the survival they learned was theirs to claim. Can't hold the light they burned through this colonial darkness. What tricks this nation, this American South pulled, minute by minute, to keep my grandmothers convinced. The body you're in is not enough. Your race and your gender work together to mark you less, to mark you takeable. But what they didn't know was that my grandmothers still had an unmovable strength, enough to build a bridge from here to heaven. I know when I leave this broken earth, I'll find them there, sweetening every hour. My grandmothers raised a generation of American men. There is no other way to say this. Look at any Southern family and you'll find somewhere in a past most will not claim a Black woman. These men who call themselves bootstrapping and self-made, somewhere there's a Black woman and her unthanked hands who lifted them to where they are now. My father tells a story of the sons of his grandmother's employers, how they, instead of the pension she was promised, decided to give her a damned old tire, an old suitcase, dusty in the yard. What thanks is this for the years she raised that family, for the care they cannot forget. My father could never forgive those men, their Southern tradition, their American tradition. Even now, they tell us Black women are going to save this whole nation with votes or magic or our style taken and renamed. But this is no longer the land of masses and mammies. We are only superheroines for our own daughters and sons. My grandmothers did not give their lives for me to keep nursing this country, to keep shucking and jiving in a bizarro American dream. My grandmothers are worth more than this corrupt remembering. Now there is no room for the Dixieland lie. We no longer hold these truths you made us accept. Under God, yes, we hear him singing a song of powerful love despite the united hate of America. Grandmothers, women made of salt and spirit, you are faith, continuous. Continue us, raise us to be heroes and heroines, to tell this country that we are not mules, not beasts. You, an army of workers and wives, we hid our fears and woes in your indestructible, ever-present ladiness. The blood you pass down to us is all we will ever need to save our lives. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Ashley. And I think hearing you talk about bringing these two poems together, this is not on the question that I sent you, but just a comment of hearing it together. I guess the idea of ladiness that Clifton puts together, you're also saying that this is a golden shovel that you're including in, or was, I guess, commissioned or asked to be included in an anthology of, is it just called Southern Women?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting, I guess. I don't know if it's maybe for tonight, except that, or this afternoon, except it's interesting to think of that ancestry as well. Those two words in particular, I think, for women and those who identify as women, it's a very weird inheritance. And lady, I think, has a certain world, and women too. Mm-hmm. Do you, I guess for you, is there anything in those words that you feel particularly attached to, or like you're writing with, or have you ever felt something different with them?
Yeah, so I think the word ladiness means a lot to me, because as a Black woman, really as a Black person, but specifically Black women or female identifying people, we are not traditionally, or even now in the present, really given room to be those things that are traditionally associated with ladiness, especially the genteel Southern, lady. We are not allowed to be delicate at all. We have to be strong. We have to be just this impenetrable force of, strength for everyone around us. We are not often given room for, quietness or gentleness, and people sometimes assume that we don't need those things that a lady might need. Well, we're independent, we don't need anybody around us. Oh, we can raise millions of children, by ourselves, which we can, but again, we're not given the room to be a full person or a full, lady. And so when she talks about that, she's of course referencing, going all the way back to slavery, how Black women had to figure out ways to make sure their children and their men were not killed or tortured more than, normal, or more than would have been by their masters. And so they had to protect themselves or harden themselves, or dress in a certain way or look a certain way to try to detract from their beauty so people wouldn't rape them, to be honest, And so, yeah, so it's a very loaded word. And for me, I think as a Southern woman, of course, there's this idea that we are supposed to be this particular kind of, how do I say, like, we have to be, beautiful and be able to cook every meal and just the, best hostess, all this kind of stuff. But I'm also Black. So there's that legacy too. Like I'm kind of trying to embody all those things at once. And that's sort of a liberating thing too, to know that I can choose to be whatever kind of woman that I want to be. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
Oh, thank you. And it's I can see so much of what you're saying in the way that you write, I think, and also, of course, when you call upon Clifton. I'm going to jump through some of what I had planned on asking you, but I just, so all of you know, Ashley is also the recipient. The Clifton, Ashley and Jones relationship has continued to evolve. And she is both the recipient of the Lucille Clifton Poetry Prize and the Lucille Clifton Legacy Award. And I was wondering, Ashley, if you could talk about being a Southern woman, but meeting Lucille Clifton, who is not a Southern poet, in fact.
Yeah, she isn't. And I guess, for one, I will say, Black culture and Southern culture have a lot of really interesting intersections because in many ways, we all come from here. I always joke, everybody has some connection to Alabama somehow. Literally everyone I meet, somehow we find some way that they're from Alabama, like distantly or, whatever. But for me with Clifton, what brought me to her is how she really seemed to invite me into the room or into the poem. Instead of constructing these pieces or these poems that are so difficult to get into, or poems that write around everything instead of just saying the thing, when I encountered her work, I felt like, for one, I actually could understand everything easily. It wasn't like, okay, let me go look up this Greek myth and let me go look up, it was just, this is what she said, here it is, which I appreciate beyond measure. I mean, I know all of us who have, umpteen degrees in literature, I have one, I have them. We like to, flex our ability to gloss a very difficult poem, but for me as a reader and just as a human, I appreciate it when people talk directly to me and say the thing that they mean instead of trying to make it the hardest, maze ever. So that's one thing that really drew me to her, and how unapologetic she was about every kind of being that she was. She talked about motherhood, she talked about Blackness, she talked about her body, she talked about everything, just unapologetically. And that's the thing that brings me to her. Even though she is not Southern, she exemplifies everything that I aspire to be as a woman, as a Southern woman, as a human. She invites you in and tells you hard truths, but in the most beautiful way possible.
Yes. I think I'm just going to tag on a one last little question for you, and then we'll move on to our next guest. But I was hoping too that you could talk about maybe, of course, you're saying a lot of this through Clifton and how she, I don't know if you would, yes, she sounds like a teacher of yours, but maybe a friend as well, and that line could be, like you said, it wasn't difficult to jump through or get to. She's talking to you frankly, an honesty that she probably wanted to give to so many people and women. But I was wondering if you could say a bit about this. You've mentioned the ladiness, I guess, and a response to being a Southern woman and all that you must manage as a woman of color in the South. How many personalities you're trying to fulfill, and how many ones you feel maybe actively denied in the culture or indirectly denied. But Birmingham, Alabama, is such an infamous space. And this is a space where so many voices have been silenced, and it hasn't only been the Black community, but any other peoples that have integrated or been killed off of those spaces. Can you talk a little bit about writing in a space where you know your ancestors were silenced?
That's a good question. It's as if you do this for a living, Carrie. Goodness, that's a really good question.
Not for a living. This is a hobby.
Well, wow. Yeah, I guess that's part of what makes it so great to live in Birmingham. And I didn't always feel this way about Birmingham. Let me be totally honest. As a teen and a child growing up here, I was ready to get out of Dodge. You know, I just kept thinking, when I grow up, I'm going to get out of here. I'm not going to have to deal with Southern people anymore. I don't have an accent already, so I'll blend in anywhere. Like, I was really just figuring out how to get the heck out of here. But once I left, I really realized I had this huge love for Southern culture. And
you said Terry.
What's that?
Sorry.
No, you're
living.
Go ahead. But let me get to the question quickly, because I know I could go off on a tangent. So yeah, writing in a place where I know people's voices have been silenced. Yeah, I mean, that definitely is true just living in America. Like, I feel like there's nowhere I could go where I wouldn't be like, oh, here's where some of my people were killed. Here's where some of my people were raped. Here's where we're still not able to do this and that. But being from Birmingham and learning all of that history as a child, like, I grew up knowing who I was, what happened. You know, I could literally see those places where people marched. I work around the corner from 16th Street Baptist Church, so I can literally see those spaces. We have a substitute teacher who was a foot soldier, and she tells us those stories all the time. Like, it's right there with me. So for me, writing about that, or even like giving voice in a space where so many of our people were and are voiceless, it's that much more rewarding for me, because I feel like I'm doing something meaningful, and I'm doing the work for those people who couldn't do it. Like, I'm just a vessel for whatever it is that needs to be said. So it just feels very special.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm so happy that you were able to share these thoughts, and your Clifton poem that you brought and the one that you wrote after her. It was, and to hear where you were planting your own kind of mark in the story. I'm going to move on to our next guest. We will be welcoming now Alison Grace Koehler. Alison Grace Koehler is, get ready for this because it's such a beautiful bit of language. She is a stained glass poet. You can imagine what it is. You can look at her website, but she makes windows. She makes windows and writes poems on them. She sometimes, I think, does write on surfaces like paper, but she also is able to combine beautiful fractured pieces of her own world and of other worlds to show us something so new and so fresh. So, I mean, these are words that are kind of empty in some ways, but I'm using them, and it's a really intriguing space that she holds in visual art and how she weds that with poetry. She is the author of a book that is coming out very, very soon that is called Stained Glass Poetry. This, I believe, is coming out from another collective based in Paris called Paris Heretics. So you should maybe look them up as well and follow them, an interesting foundation of the project. But Alison is going to be talking to us about some of her connection at this point in time. All of this is so kind of the moment too, even if it's passing through decades and eons of what's brought us here all on a screen together. I'd like to welcome Alison and to have her talk to us about what she's bringing, I guess, as far as ancestry and homage.
Thank you very much, Carrie and Manderley Collective. I'm honored to be here today. I'm going to begin by reading a poem written by a woman named Matilda Olkin, who is a Lithuanian Jew who was killed in 1941 when she was only 19 years old, and she was a poet. Her poetry was translated into English somewhat recently, and a diary of hers survived as well, in addition to a collection of poetry. And I'm going to read a poem of hers that she wrote when she was only 18 years old. A word. It is so hard for me. I would like so much to utter one word. That unspoken word trembles within me. I glance aside and I see processions, generations gliding past. Into blue longing, in shivering suffering. In joy, quivering in tiny rays of light. In the pain of aeons of shattered hopes. But I am that unspoken word in shadow. I carry that unspoken word in my heart. It is so difficult for me. I would just like to utter that one word, just one word for the crowds and for the nations. The processions would pause. Time would come to a halt. All the generations would pause and listen, and my word would flutter above the mountains and the seas, above flowing rivers and rough waters, and longing and trembling suffering would cease in the pain of aeons of shattered hopes.
Thank you, Alison. I feel like that poem is a sister poem for you in a lot of ways. I mean, some of the language that's used seems like some of the language you employ to describe some of your own art. And I think I'm a bit haunted by this idea of a young speaker looking for this word that feels like it contains a certain wholeness. But I guess as a transition to you and your work, I think, well, we must keep in mind, I guess, that you're also bringing a poem from a woman who is from your, I want to say this is your great-grandmother's homeland. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Your grandmother, was she born there in Lithuania?
No. So my great-grandmother was born there, and I went on a trip to Lithuania a couple years ago. I decided to go there the year that my own grandmother turned 100. She's never been to Lithuania, and I thought it would be sort of special to go there. I don't know, just to be able to tell her that I had done that, and to describe to her that experience, and to sort of see what it was like. And so I took a bus for a couple of days from Paris to Lithuania, and when I arrived, I was couch surfing, and I ended up staying with this woman, kind of who coincidentally was born in the same town as my great-grandmother, this town of Yanova, which I didn't know ahead of time. So again, it started as just sort of a personal project, but that was sort of first amazing coincidence. And so we discovered that after talking for about 15 minutes, And she immediately offered to drive me there, to go there together. And so Yulia and I went to this town of Yanova, the town that used to be half Jewish. And we went there. There's still some traces of what it once was. One street has some buildings that are still somewhat intact. A plaque kind of talks a little bit about what happened. And there is a Jewish cemetery that is there in the town. And Yulia actually grew up right across the street from the Jewish cemetery. And we went there together and walked around, and it's hard to describe what that experience was like, but it was when I was there with her that I had this feeling that I wanted to make something in this space. And so Carrie mentioned I work with stained glass as well as poetry. I wanted to make something with broken glass and stone. And so this is a project I wanted to talk about. I mean, it's still in its somewhat young stages, but it is one that's very important to me. There is a little bit of interest already in the town, but again, it's still in its early stages.
Alison, can I ask you if
yes.
this, I mean, would you describe that I understand, I guess you've told us a bit why you were drawn maybe to take the initial trip, but the decision, I guess, to involve art making with it, it's a different step in the relationship with this country, with this city.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how close you would be to installing perhaps close to the cemetery, but can you talk about why maybe I don't know how conscientious the choice was, if it was very directed and known, or if it was a kind of growing feeling, but what, I guess, could it mean for you or is drawing you to think of putting some of your heart there in your art in Lithuania?
I guess it is something that it wasn't planned initially. It sort of has, I guess that sort of the need or the desire has sort of grown after going there. I guess the idea of building some kind of impossible bridge across time that reaches both backwards and forwards simultaneously, that connects with me on a personal level, but hopefully beyond that. I guess that feels like part of the work to do. I don't know, that impossible bridge building, the acrobatics. I mean, I feel like it, yeah, I don't know the why of it. I guess I'm still trying to understand, but it seems meaningful. And I guess when I was there as well, I had a chance to learn a little bit about Lithuania's relationship to stained glass, which may not know about already, but they actually, during Soviet occupation, there was a lot of stained glass made in Lithuania using this technique, dalle de verre, slab glass. And there were a lot of really kind of fascinating monuments built in Lithuania out of stained glass. And I had a chance to learn a little bit about that when I was there. And I would like to use that technique in the building of a sculptural piece as another way to kind of reach both, into Lithuania's past. I mean, to try and sort of bridge that space in a number of different ways, and to connect with the today of Lithuania as well.
That's beautiful. And I guess, I don't know how many of us would have realized about the stained glass of Soviet occupied Lithuania, but it sounds like an interesting way to be, and without, endorsing one history or another, but to just be bringing some other, well, if they're fractured, as you often work in fractured pieces and even found pieces, I mean, this is a kind of foundness, I guess, that it makes a lot of sense in some ways for me when I think about what you're attracted to in art making. Going back maybe in a small connection to the poem that you read, but also your own work, this idea that there was the speaker looking for this word or an ability to utter one word, this concentration on one. And yet you of course make things that exist in a oneness. You make a window and it's self-contained, but often your pieces are incredibly attuned to the broken. And I was wondering if you could talk about that part of your, I mean, even in your poetry, I think from line to line, there's a fractured sense. There's not, we get sort of shadings of a narrative or of character, or even of sort of thematic. Is there something you could tell us about your attraction to the brokenness and maybe not necessarily wanting previous sort of standards of wholeness that might have been offered in the study of stained glass or the study of poetry?
Sure. I guess I've been attracted to the shapes of broken shards for a long time, and I don't even know if I can explain why that is. But I became interested in stained glass for a number of reasons and ended up spending a few years in France doing some formal training where I would copy faces and fabric from windows that were built in the 12th and 13th centuries, and really had to spend a lot of time inside the history and tradition of stained glass in a way that really didn't invite other voices. And I spent a couple of years sort of doing that and learning about restoration. And by the end of that time, I understood I respect that world, but didn't want that to be what I do. And I don't know, almost immediately after, I mean, I became more interested in more contemporary possibilities that the medium has to offer, because it is color and light, and it is, the possibilities are vast, and they aren't just steeped in they're maybe steeped in a past that goes back much deeper, that's much sort of bigger and more universal than medieval glazing, though that's fascinating too from an art historical perspective. But I became interested in just working also in a different kind of way. I mean, traditionally you come up with a design for your window, you draw it out, you cut the glass, you assemble it, and you kind of follow these steps, and that's important in order to build something that is structurally sound. And I became interested in just playing with that and not starting with a drawing, but starting with the broken pieces and using them to help build the composition and help sort of build what the piece will become. And leaving holes in windows, I mean, and other kinds of things, which
everything that's not
not
supposed to be with a window, you want to do.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, someone has to be
yeah.
that. I don't know. And I guess I would say that the way I work with glass is somewhat similar to the way I write poetry. I will begin with maybe a color or a feeling or a visual memory, and try and take a hammer to it and sort of reassemble the pieces into something that is, I don't know, that is connected but still, I don't know, a bit loose, but solid. So I guess the processes kind of feel the same, or that, I don't know, I guess it kind of feels like a more painterly approach to stained glass making. I don't know, I guess there are different ways to see it, but those worlds feel really connected for me. I guess the processes are similar, and they influence each other in a lot of different ways in terms of the content, as well as the style.
Yes. Well, thank you, Alison, for sharing well, your voyage to Lithuania and what you have planned there, and also a bit about your process. And I think that ancestry of art too that you are managing as you look at poetry and stained glass is a kind of choice towards homage of old traditions, or inventing the new, or going from. We're going to move on now to our third guest. Going to be talking to Fork Burke. Fork is currently living in Switzerland, living in Biel. And she is, I guess, I know a lot of her work through one of her more recent publications, which is called Number 33 Checklist, which is a form that maybe she can tell us a little bit about, but it's, there's a bit of homage, I would say, sort of implanted into this writing. She is also the co-editor of I Will Be Different Every Time, Black Women in Biel. So Fork, I think, is both a poet and I guess a sort of lyric or an essayist, a really important writer living in Europe, but has, I think, had a number of city experiences in the United States that she draws from in her work. But it's been interesting to meet her in Europe and to learn a little bit about how she's investing herself in Biel. Fork, would you please, I guess, introduce us some to the ideas of ancestry that you would like for us to meet with you today?
Yeah, I'd love to. I was thinking a lot about ancestry, and of course, to think about that is to not single out anything. I've been thinking so much about non-separation, and to even meet with everyone now in this time where I'm changing so much as a writer, you know, and it just to show up here feels very raw. And so the ancestry has been very close, and also this feeling of us being, we are ancestor too. You know, we are ancestor. We are the unborn. We are here. We are the ancestor. And so I've been thinking a lot about working in realms and being keeper of certain realms, being a realm, and each of us doing that, and also like moving past words, which is strange for a poet. And so that leads me also like back to Burroughs, but really past words, like this, some strange idea about, how do I say, words being just held hostage right now. I'm thinking a lot about seeing through words, like not from behind the word, but literally through the word. I don't hear them the same anymore. So it's good to be here, but it's very, very strange. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else right now. Like as a poet, to be with you all, just rethinking that whole position. I think we're in a different space right now, and I'm really trying to focus on different languages right now, and not verbal ones. Bird language, all the languages, everything that's speaking, that's not words right now. Words are kind of taking a break from their job that we've given them.
Fork, you made a brief allusion.
I'm crazy.
What? No, I'm with you. I was trying to think about past words.
Oh, yes.
But you sort of explained, I guess, the dimensionality or how you're kind of looking at that going through, but also, I don't know, past, this is one of our words that is strange tonight, I guess. But you made a brief allusion to Burroughs, and I thought maybe Yes, this I know is a big person for you in writing, in thinking, and I didn't know if you were going to share something from him or tell us a little bit about your relationship with, this is William S. Burroughs, I guess, for all of you that we're talking about, one of Fork's.
Yeah, I was looking through all of his work, and the way I work also is just this process of day after day of opening books and what wanted to come, and none of his work wanted to be read, except one piece maybe from The Adding Machine about time travel. But since everyone has shared something also that they wrote, I wrote a piece, so I'll read that.
Okay.
Okay. And then maybe that one, we'll see. All right. And also I'll just say quickly, what I like and just what I want to take time to value is that even being here is not really being here any separate from working. I'm still in the listening, the process of coming to this spot, the process of speaking to you. This is all for me still happening in this cut up. So it came like this. It's something about the radio. Having received a signal, making your mouth move like that can't be good for you. Can't be good for your insides. Words are become an extinction itself. Devouring being, between words, a cry for help, a pause, a feeling. Remember? Word, lost species, tree and leaf, body stuff, sentences. Word seeks to silence those languages, to single itself out. Word, our language. All life forms language. Our language. Ancestor function. Ancestor vision. Body building. Space sentences. How the realm functions. Where else is language? Tony came back from April 20th, 1992. Free the words, retail whores. What was ritual? You can't point to me. Answer in the fire. No blast away for space. This is on sale. Paint to exist. Raise your arms. You will receive also idiot vaccine. Constructing our conversations. Our lens. That camera is an eye, not a mirror. William asked, how do you short circuit control? Out of time into space, image as skin. There are buckets of just skin. The reader is collage. Interrupt repetition. Swallow what you ate. Nervous system can't be housed. Follow non-separation until you don't understand anything anymore. What does function belong with? What are the imagined enemies of this function? A real war without real weapons. That's the piece that came. Thanks.
I think I got, at some point, I really just got sort of hung up on thinking about ancestor function. Just putting those two words together.
Yes, it's very important. It's where our immortality lies, you know. Honoring ancestors, keeping those altars going, keeping a connection, asking, offering, giving, like it's real, you know. We're real.
But I also liked that you used function several times, and I was starting to feel a sort of mechanic idea with it as well, how you're relating that maybe with things you were saying about language and the word that might be this sort of, for me, the word sort of became each one of us a little bit egotistical, thinking we may not need to be masked or put together with the sentence, but I don't know, it's very interesting to think about how this poem was operating on something that you're saying is the essential and the thing that we must be doing, but also that it is still a part of something that's moving without, I don't know if you would say that, fork yourself, without our will.
Mm. I mean, magic is not the right word, maybe, but they are functions. They are activated. You know, we're not writers. I mean, that's not only it. We're not that. We're not what they told us. We're keepers of something, and it's a big job, and we all do it differently, and we all bring that, and I would say we all write together. So for me, that is, it's not that I homage anyone, but that for me, we are writing together.
Yes. That to me is a sort of segue that I will just take advantage of to ask you a question that I had previously thought of. I was lucky to see you read at Spoken Word Paris. I think that was this year. I don't know if that was this year or at the end of 2019. But you read from I guess it's an essay that you're including in the book that you're co-editing called "I Will Be Different Every Time, Black Women in Beale." And the line that just a little bit like Ancestor Function did for me today, but this is so different, that really stayed with me from your reading was, "I'm always writing with you, not for you." And some of what you just shared, and then I guess thinking about this book that you're creating for Black women in Beale, the past women, present women, future women. Can you talk about this belief of yours that is maybe, I don't want to say it's anti-homage, but it's a really active homage. It's not putting there's no otherness, I guess, in it. You believe maybe that you're writing with everyone from forward and backward.
Yes. I believe that also for the books. I've always said books write each other. You can read a book, you're reading a book sometime, and you get a real strong sense of, what book the writer read, and so there are these layers with the work. There's this progression. It's I see all of the work of artists as a motion, and not writing something and saying, here, this is for you, but to cut those titles, artist, writer, poet, although they're fine, but even when you don't have the word, like lately, just to relish not having the word, because somehow to be relegated to English, German, like whatever these languages are, they don't interest me, I think, as much as like extinct languages or other languages in the world I've just been listening to. So to get back what you said about, and the quote from me about not writing for you, writing with you, it just feels like it's a truth. It's a truth that it's a much more comfortable place in which to work from, to think from. What I want to say is, it's a no permission place. These spaces. It's not only what is being written that is interrogated, but who I am, and what I'm pulling from, and what have I accepted as real. I have to interrogate everything.
Okay. I still will be fascinated by it, I think, for some years to come, because it's such a, I guess we've inherited in thinking of ancestry and homage that there must be such a gesture for the previous, or the elderly, or there's an altar that we have, which is not easy, I think, to look at or perform, especially when we have such violent histories all around us. So it's interesting to think of taking some of those barriers, whether they're altar or other things. And you opened tonight or this afternoon talking about realms, which I guess, can I ask you, are the realms, when you think of them, do they have these, are there permissions, or are things more fluid? Or I guess when you think of that kind of space or time?
Are they fluid? Well, like when you mentioned the violent histories and everything, we're not separate from that. The way it hits you, the way it hits your body, when you're in contact with it, when you know your history, when you know someone else's history, compassion, empathy, just being human. I just feel the realm as, you know, and just to back up a bit, you know, Burroughs is important to me because he was the first writer that said, he didn't just say, you know, here's a book. Oh, I read Burroughs' book. I read everything. It wasn't that. He said, what are words and how do they function? So for me, it became very almost quest-like to figure out, not just to write, but what is this? What are we doing? And how did we used to do it? How can we do it? Is it a weapon? Are we stuck in resistance? Or is our job to just create this realm? And is there an enemy? Or, yeah, but, you know, so all of this happening simultaneously. This is the realm, and our power of our realm, the unstoppable, and I guess the weakness and the mirrorness of, if that's a word, of what we call evil and everything. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's just where I went. So.
I don't even know if my question had a good form to it. It was, you know, what is the function of my question? One other thing, I guess this is not something I had prepared, but you have said maybe a few times in our session that you consider us keepers, even if we take away some of these sort of public or social titles of writer and poet or whatever we have that we tag up above our name or beside it. Keeper is such an interesting word because there is, for me, in that word, if I think about the function of it, there is a kind of possessive quality to it. But I don't know if you would consider, well, I just want to ask you, I guess, when you think of keeper and when you think of what we're talking about tonight with ancestry and homage, where would keeper come in? Is it about history, or is it about something that could also be a very, I don't know, in ancestry, I get lost thinking about, is there an experience that you, keeper, we're bringing something maybe to the next generation or to the future selves, but gosh, I'm going to get lost here.
No, yeah, me too.
Maybe if you could talk more about this idea of being a keeper. I'm just, maybe because I don't understand exactly how you're using it, but I'm so intrigued.
Me too. I guess when I started to say that, you know, to notice if people were keepers of something, it's a little more than being good at it. It's the one who is so fine-tuned at it that when you are discerning through things, and, you know, Alison, you're keeper of stained glass. This is what I mean, that it's this. Or I would say, you know, Diamanda Gallas is the keeper of something, you know. And in that way, it's what I pull on. It's the other eye. It's the main thing. It's the clearest thing. Okay. It's the one that's bringing it, that is it. So I don't have to look at, you know, 10 people. If I'm clear that this person is the keeper of that, or that we are a collective keeper of something. Oh, please don't sneeze. It's how it works. So it's how you listen. And for me, it's like what I call just how you live the cut up. But it's a powerful observation and discernment, and tool. They're important people. The keepers. They're just vital individuals.
Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, and
it can be any field, you know, it's the keeper of that. You could be a midwife. It's just, you know, an herbologist. So we don't have to listen to 10 people. It's that one. It's the one who remembers deeply, who is, it's important. I don't know. Yeah, that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. And it's a beautiful, I think it's a beautiful thing to be sharing with us tonight afternoon. And I think it might be a kind of good moment, unless you want to say any final comment on Burroughs or maybe the cutout, because it's true you've referenced that, but I think some of us here may not know what that is for you, but it's a form that I think you're often drawn to and have collaborated with Burroughs in.
Oh yeah, okay. I'll just close and say something about the cut-up. So it's a form started by someone we don't know, and then started by, because there's always that person, and then Brian Geisen, and then Burroughs took it up, and they were cutting through paper. Basically what they were doing is breaking association lines, you know. So when you read, you know, there's this automatic thing that's going on. There's something not normal that's going on. But when you cut it up and you start to observe and you start to bring your awareness and play and listen, and it's prophetic. So over a period of time, you can do that. You know, like one time I was doing a cut up, I opened a book and it said, find another book, you know, and so for me, I don't make this separation. I don't take these things as, okay, and then I did cut ups. Like I live like that, you know. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Fork. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're keeping. Okay, we're going to move on to our fourth guest. We are going to be talking now to Che Yeun. Che is a beautiful fiction writer, and she's currently in Boston, Massachusetts, where she is studying the history of science, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And she has had some of her work published in Granta. I think that one is actually a pretty recent publication of hers with this beautiful neon cover, in Virginia Quarterly Review and Kenyon Review Online. And she is a Hedgebrook alumna. I will go quickly to Che because I want us to be able to hear some of the poem that I know she's brought tonight, that she's translated, in fact. So let's talk with Che and hear about some of her ideas with ancestry. Che, we're ready for your poet, I guess.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with everyone. And it's an honor to also join the conversation in this moment following Fork, because so much of what I wanted to say was finally given the words. When Carrie reached out to me, the first word that came to mind when I thought of ancestry was ritual. In Korean culture, ancestor worship is very much ingrained in daily living, and like you have to feed your ancestors, literally. Like you have to set up a meal for them and then leave the door open so that they can come in, and you have to like use your utensils to make sounds with the food, and like that sound is the sound of your ancestors eating. And it's been said that up to 9, I think we're told that 9 generations of ancestors come in and eat with you. So it's really important to keep this going for the sake of your family. And so yeah, the idea of ritual and language also, because growing up, I moved around a lot. My Korean was always clumsy and stiff and, you know, rudimentary and accented, and I was always punished in school for it. Speaking of rituals, I was also beaten in school for not being, you know, good enough or Korean enough. And so, the problem of language was also very much how I understood ancestry. And so the poem I'd like to share today is from a Korean poet named Seongbok Lee, or Lee Seongbok, who has been publishing since the 1980s and is beloved today as a kind of poet's poet in Korea. And I first came across his poems online. I had never missed the Korean language before, but when I was living here in America, I suddenly found myself missing a connection with that language. And so I was, just scrolling through various poetry blogs, and I think it's not a coincidence that his poetry is most resonant with me, because he is also someone who feels rejected by language, and who also in turn rejects language as the ultimate mode of knowing or expressing. And in an interview, he has once said that all poetry is just a record of everything that has failed. And so this notion of failure, I think, is central in the poem I'm going to read. And speaking of rituals, this poem also speaks of another ritual in Korea, which is military service. And for all male citizens in Korea, it's mandatory that you serve for two-ish years in incredibly harsh conditions. There are countless assaults and suicides that happen in the military, and those experiences are not only silenced, they are very much normalized. And so all of these failures of ritual, failures of language are on my mind today. The title is 내 생에 복수하는 유일한 방법처럼, which translates to as if it were the only way to take revenge against my life. In Chinhae, when I was an army recruit, there was a guard post by a creek where I once saw white grains of rice floating by. I put down my M1 rifle, and like a deer drinking from a spring, I ate the rice from the water. Maybe I was hungry, but what I wanted was to see myself dredging up the grains. I wanted to devastate myself and take revenge against my life. When I stood guard in front of the commissary, I saw men who would throw their red bean bread on the ground if the taste was even a little amiss. When the commander's shepherd ran to me and barked, I threatened him with my gun stock, and then I chewed for a long time the bread covered in dirt. I wanted to be devastated. I wanted to gaze at myself wanting to be devastated, as if it were the only way to take revenge against my life. And when I rode the destroyer as a private first class, the sergeant from Seoul, who had been kind to me like a brother, he took me up to the flight deck because I'd spilled seaweed soup on his boots, and he kicked away at me. At first, in defiance, I asked why he was hitting me, but it didn't stop until my sky blue uniform was drenched in blood. I asked him to hit me more, to just hit me until I was dead. I kept clinging, but the sergeant clicked his tongue and went downstairs without looking back. I was happy, and I could not be more satisfied, having taken revenge against my life. And then 30 years after getting discharged, I visited a teacher nearing retirement. She told me about her dog. After wandering outdoors for several days, the dog returned with swollen nipples and a full belly. And when they went to the animal hospital, they were told it was an imaginary pregnancy. And isn't that also my story? All the happiness I have stolen from this world has been an imaginary pregnancy of my devastation, of wanting to become devastated, that there is no greater technology of revenge. I learned without visiting the animal hospital. Thank you.
Thank you, Che, for that translation.
It was terrible, in case you were wondering.
Well, I mean, we aren't here to police that, but I think at least the essence of the poem, I don't know, if you feel it's not up to par, I can't, I don't know what to say to you about that, except that it touches me when I read it, what you told me you were going to share, it touched me. And I think it's, well, and the way that you introduce it too is as prefacing with some of his, some of Songbok Lee's own thoughts about what language was or wasn't able to be for him, as far as something that I guess there's such a weird thing about making sense, but if you're talking about language documenting all of the disasters or mistakes of the world, it's interesting that if we look at what we're filling our homes with, or what each of us has spent so much time sort of sitting with, is a collection of that. If that's what I mean, that we're nurturing and that we're bringing close for some sort of information. When you wrote to me about this poem, you said, and I'm going to quote you, "The poem echoes the violent past and present of where I come from. This violence is important to me too, the violence that has made my life possible, or perhaps, as Songbok Lee would say, impossible." This tension between the possible and impossible that you're noting for Lee and for yourself is so intriguing to me. Could you tell us a little bit about how you see those words, I guess, joining together in some sort of collaboration, but also at in a simultaneous destruction or mistake?
Yeah, I guess it's also tied to how I think about ancestry, because, you know, growing up, I was always reminded that any piece of comfort I enjoy today is because of the sacrifice and bloodshed of my ancestors. And yes, on one hand, it's that kind of like nationalistic propaganda you can find in many parts of the world, unfortunately, but it was real to me because I could see it in my grandmother's eyes. I could see it in the stories she told. And finally, I saw it in my own stories and in my own eyes as I experienced violence in my life. So I feel like violence has made my life possible, but it's also made my life impossible in that it has shaped every person I will never be. And I am always haunted by all the people I will never be because of where I'm from, or, you know, the body I inhabit. Like, it's not a good thing to admit. It's not an attractive quality for someone to have, but I am obsessed with every person that I will never get to be. And so I feel that kinship to this poem because it's about military service and its violence, and all the lives the speaker will never get to live because of it. All of the speaker's imaginary pregnancies. And so every time I read it, I feel that rage of, and the failure of language to even grasp that rage. And so what I'm left with, I think, is a sense of helplessness, and the helplessness of language that has to just wander through a world that it can't describe. And it's strangely liberating, and it's one of the most important feelings in my writing and in my life.
Yes. Che, do you think these imaginary pregnancies, or these lives that were impossible to have, would you ever consider that they could also be a kind of ancestry, or?
Wow. Yeah, because I think the life I have now was once a life that someone who came before me could not imagine having. Yeah.
Okay. I also want to talk a little bit about, when you contributed in 2016 to Verse of April, you also translated a beautiful Korean poem that is in English titled "Me and Natasha and the White Donkey." And between hearing that poem, which you actually read in a video while looking at a sort of unstopping snow of a winter that you were experiencing in South Korea, in your home, you read that in Korean, so you were you read it in Korean. There was the English subtitles across the screen. When I hear that poem or when I see it, I guess, and hear what you're putting into the Korean that I can't grasp, and then hearing this poem that you've translated, I start to feel something I'm so naive, where South Korean literature would be coming from. Really, I have little access, and I'm so grateful for the access that you've given me. But I'm starting to sense something, at least in these two poems, about a really paradoxical relationship with time, which I guess when we think about language, this is also one of the only ways we really, outside of some things like gravity, are really sensing or punctuating what we would imagine is time or ancestry or the past. And I guess progress or damage, dream or nightmare, there is a sense with these two poems that time has a sort of obvious propulsion, but then there are through impossible conditions. And you talked about this sort of the ritual of violence, or the ritual of the military, or of making a meal for the ancestors. All through this nonstop ritual that we all in our cultures maintain of time. I'm wondering, I guess, if there is something that you can tell us about how the impossibility of language, and maybe what we think about with the impossibility of time, in fact, because we are all denied maybe lives or evolutions given certain violences to our ancestors, how you work with that in your own writing. You are a fiction writer primarily, so thanks for joining us, poets over here.
Thanks for harboring this fugitive. Yeah. Yeah, I actually really appreciate this question about time, because I struggle with it so much. And Daniel Morales was here but left, but he can attest to the fact that I have no sense of time in my fiction writing. It frustrates everyone who has to read early drafts of mine. And I think what it comes down to is I'm so scared of time, and I don't want to look at it. And so none of my characters look at it. But in order for a story to work, it has to be marked somehow. So I went over, how do I actually manage to sort time out in my stories? And what I found is that I turn to things in order to tell time, instead of speaking about time directly. So there are things like summer monsoons, or summer floods, or dragonflies that come at a very specific time. Like there's like 2 weeks in a year where they're there. Humidity, dryness, sandstorms, and then also things like a crack in the wall that's widening, or yellowing teeth, or breast implants, like silicone breast implants that are hardening over time. So all of these things do the timekeeping for me, and for my characters. So yeah, it's like more gentle that way. Like here is something that will wrestle with time for you, so that you don't have to do it yourself.
It's so interesting to hear that, and to also, I guess some of your first examples were more connected to the natural world, and then you got to some of the physical things, like, I mean, yellowing teeth that's the kind of thing that you I guess one day you wake up and you're like, oh my God, but it would be a rather slow degradation.
Yeah.
But this also, I guess, evidences some of the breadth of maybe what you're also trying to accomplish in prose. Or, I mean, you've had a lot of short stories published. I know you've worked on longer things as well, but in the short story form, do you like to go wide with time? Or
No, I mean, so my short stories all are very claustrophobic, I've been told. People don't leave. They are stuck in a room. They don't leave. And so, yeah, I just run out of things to describe in a room. And so I just fill rooms with what I can without trying to repeat myself. And then those things end up telling time.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Che, for bringing all of this to this session and sharing this poem. I guess I'm looking, I haven't been able to read anything, but there are some really lovely comments that if you're not paying attention, but maybe you are, to read people trying to talk back to each other. So that's wonderful that that's happening too in exchange. I want to move on now to our penultimate reader tonight. So we're going to be talking with Malik Ameer Crumpler. Malik is, I guess he's many people, in fact, and he. Oh, you're already live. Malik is live already. But he is poet and rapper and composer and producer and editor and I think when you meet Malik, you kind of feel how many worlds he's managing and how much information he's taking and transferring. There's a lot of sort of lateral moves he can make when associating what happens in poetry to what happens in music. And I think he might be giving us a little bit of that tonight, this afternoon. For a bit of sort of factual information, he is the poetry editor and co-host of Paris Lit Up, the editor-at-large of The Opiate, and co-founder of Those That This. His most recent release as a rapper and poet, I think, is an album that is called Facts, with multiple, this is signature Malik, multiple parentheses. I take it as sort of echo or reverberation, but I don't know if that's correct. Thank you, Malik, for being here. And,
thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, and
thank everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And could you, I guess, get us started with what you've decided to share with us as far as a text?
Yeah, I'll be quick too, because I know Jennifer got to go in. So one day I was reading Richard Wright's Black Power for like the 5th time, but I hadn't read it as an adult. And by adult, I mean over 25. So I was reading it and I was really in the zone and, it started talking to me. So I started talking back to it. And then out of nowhere, a journalist friend of mine named Lindsay messaged me and was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I was like, "Nothing. I ran out of books. I'm reading the last book I got." And he was like, "Oh, okay. Well, you want to meet Richard Wright's granddaughter?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course I do. Nice timing too, Lindsay." And he was like, "Well, you know me." So anyway, I go meet Ellen Wright. She lived down the street from me. So we meet up and we started talking about the impact of Richard Wright on contemporary writers. And she felt like she wasn't seeing anybody talking about her grandfather. And I said, "Well, we do. We have cigarettes and other things that we do if we don't smoke cigarettes. And we talk about your grandfather. We've been talking about your grandfather since before your grandfather got here." And she was like, "Well, show the world that." And I was like, "I don't have access to the world, but I will do what I can." So I did this. And she gave me a book that I once had before I gave all my books away when I left New York, which was this book right here, which is Richard Wright's haikus, And a lot of people didn't know Richard Wright wrote haikus. And when I first found it, I couldn't believe it because I was a little haikuist for a while. And then I let it go because it got too cliche and, but it didn't get cliche. It got used too much. You know what I mean? So you had to wait a decade to come back to what you love. Anyway, so what happened was I talked to every writer, anybody that inspires me, they live in my mind, like this little screen with the boxes or a museum. And if you unmute the writer or the inspiration, they come alive and they talk to you if they like you. Sometimes they might not like you, so you got to do offerings or rituals, whatever. Anyway, so I was talking to Richard Wright one day, and whatever's left of Richard Wright as held in his book, kept in his book, like Fork was saying, was like, "Talk to me then." So I talked to him. So He was talking in haiku, so I talked to him in haiku. Because, you know, when you go wherever you go, even if you don't know the language, you're going to talk body language. But in my head, everyone's in there doing this all the time. It's the same when we go in the Louvre or whatever. Paint and start talking, Teneretto yelling at you. Anyway, so it starts with Richard Wright. A pink afterglow behind nodding sunflowers and the smell of mint. Afterglow of mint, swaying eucalyptus trees, endless summer heat. The consumptive man who lives in the room next door did not cough today. Larger than toxic, no more paint for their faces, intense expressions. Why does the blind man stop so still for a second in the drizzling dusk? That blind moon gazes, chasing after God, finding it in you. And now this thing too, a drunken girl vomiting in the autumn rain. Certainly leisurely lays, anticipating no provocations. Scarecrow, who starved you, set you in that icy wind, and then forgot you. Young blood, who killed, set you off on frozen roads, and then dismissed you. His task completed, the scarecrow watches the truck leave loaded with corn. She sold her answers to that new scarecrow holding that rusty shotgun, drying in the sun, gleaming in a dirt pathway, the track of a snail. You have offered them the way. Your map reads quite well, if only they had eyes. The sun is drying, yellow leaves stuck on the wall by last night's rainstorm. Last night's thunderstorm, drying that wet sun as emerald petals shiver. All the long spring day, poplar trees flinging raindrops against sunlit clouds. All those vermilion voices harmonizing in a single sunset. Blossoming purple, a forgotten artichoke in a dark cupboard. Bothering purple, absurd artichokes forget to light their cigars. Clutching from the trees, thick creepers are strangling clouds in the lake's bosom, until that old pine being hugged by those cold clouds finally answers. Heading toward the sea, drifting into the cold rain, how strong the smoke is. That decaying frog, heeling toward our sea, lifts, never again to land. That's about it. Oh, silent claps. That's that new silent claps. That's the catch, right? That's the new technology flipping itself. Silent clap. Yeah, that's my parentheses too. The ripples, silent ripples, and that's that new.
Oh yes, this is applauding.
Thank y'all for listening. All y'all over there in this what is this? Who said the Brady Bunch? Anyway, let me not take up Jennifer time.
Malik, all right, so I think you call these Richard Wright duets, yes?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dialogues.
Dialogue. Okay.
They're part of a bigger piece called Othered Poems.
Othered.
With the apostrophe D, yeah. That's my thing I'm on. I stay othering these days. I don't even give, you know what I mean? You get so sick of people. What are you? Where are you from? What do you do? I'm other. That's what you were thinking anyway, right? You just want to know which kind of other I was? Well, there you go. I'm all of them.
All right, and then no silent applause after that kind of othering. Head explosion.
It's the invisibles.
Malik, when you introduced, I guess, what you've just read for us, you talked about how when you I loved what you said about sometimes these people may not like us, so we have to see first if the voice or the ancestor
like
will
Che
allow
was
us
saying.
to play with what they worked so hard to do in their minutes. But you also mentioned, I guess, that you've always been talking about him, that you were talking about him before he was here. So
that's a bit much. That's some Dick Gregory, but yeah, you know, if we believe that we're returning, but it's the ripples. Like ripples only go out so far, and then they hit something and they return to the source. So if we're source returners or keepers of whatever, like Fork was saying, we return, even if it's just a consciousness return. If it's the return of a thought, you know, or the return of an idea, or the return of an inspiration. But a lot of that period of returning to Richard Wright's work, I was always copying them, you know, and then at a certain point you copy people in life if you really lose your mind. If they really help you lose your mind enough, you'll try to, you know, run away to Paris and live like this person you read, who no one else who loved them ran over there except a couple other crazy people, you know, and then you get here and you're like, what am I supposed to do here? And he better start talking to you. You better go ask for his help. He's the one who brought you here. One of the ones, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's what I mean. It's always a bunch of them. Sorry.
Yeah. What does it mean for you, I guess, to be in these dialogues? I mean, I don't know if we can, I don't want to be applying my own sense of time that's quite traditional, I'm feeling, to your sense of what you're doing with Wright, what you're doing with any of your work. But I guess thinking of, we are all, in some ways, recognizing what we're living together, which maybe we are talking to ancestors right now about, we've tried to, I guess, about pandemic.
Yep, they on the internet. Mm-hmm.
Yes. When you're dialoguing, duetting with Richard Wright, I guess, is there something that you're seeing in his words that have a particular relevance to a now that you know?
Well, so a thing Richard Wright got me with more so than other people, but heavy in the tradition of slave narrative or escape narrative, you know, because a lot of people get slave narrative confused for just one group of melanated people, and all people of the world have been slaves, and currently some are. So just the concept of whose narrative, why narrative, and then with him, it was the way he dealt with toxicity. So his characters weren't just toxic and then they just go off and some heroic person comes to get them. His characters go and investigate their toxicness. One most obvious instance is when Bigger Thomas is obsessed with that rat. You know, how I'm gonna deal with this rat. Now, a lot of people, you know, you got whole cartoon series based on chasing that rat. And we all grew up on it. And if you didn't, you probably have a better relationship with rats than, you know what I'm saying? Like the toxicity of that. But when he goes and investigates that toxicity, he goes for the clarity of it, not just what is the moral way or what is good for the times, what's trending, but how are we really going to assess toxicness, violence, the need to deliver toxicness? Do you really need to be, all that type of paradoxical confusion, he goes to sort it out. And that's the task, because, you know, the history of this planet is, you know, what do they call it? The carbon consequence. It's not enough. Like I'm not taking the carbon consequence or that's the way of nature. I investigate the nature of nature because some of the stuff he investigated clued me in. It's a telescope, and I feel certain of those ancestors bring you back to the telescope and dust up the lens. And then you turn it on yourself. So the telescope becomes the microscope and the nanoscope. And then the little things in the telescope realize they're being looked at and they get their telescope together. And now you got all this telescope happening. So that's the relationship I get into. And then in his nonfiction, like in Black Power, the way he investigated the concept of a power that could be Black in a different colored world at that time. And the fact that a lot of his predictions came true in dealing with Nkrumah and West Africa and Central Africa and all of that. And what does that mean for a Black American to encounter the trauma of returning there and no one being like, welcome back. Everybody being like, you want to buy something? Or what you doing here? You're not from here, and getting that trip, like, because that was a big thing for Black Americans after the civil rights era, to be like, wait a minute, we African. And then some people was going over there and they was like, where you from? You know, and the other came up, and no one was talking about the other than and the othering of others, because it was just too much of a paradox, and no one wanted to show anybody that we were that undivided. I ran on too long. It's something like that. I didn't get it right, but it's something like that.
Okay, Malik, you haven't gone on too long. I think I don't know how fair I've been with my minutes, but I'm trying. Malik, I have one other question for you before we let you and yes, you and Richard Wright go, I guess. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of, yes, you write with Wright, but you also have some work that I guess, while it could be touched by him, I would say is more your own or something like this. It's maybe not always after or with him. And I'm specifically thinking of a reading that I heard from you recently in Paris, at Spoken Word Paris again. Maybe this has a little bit of a touch with some of what Che actually shared, but in a particular poem that you shared, actually it might have been is it the whole poem? It was a long work.
The Mise.
Excuse me?
The Mise.
The Mise, is that the title, The Mise?
No, it's just about all the Mise.
Yes,
like Che was talking about Ashley.
It's
yeah,
Malik,
the different, yeah, the Maliks. Yeah.
And there's Malik at age 9, and there's Malik at age 99 and age 23, and they're all self-confronting and training and also telling off and shaming, and there's a lot. But you also have in other poems you have the grandmas. There's
always it's always grandma time. As Ashley know that when first time I talked to Ashley. Some years ago, we got on grandma time and almost missed our reading. Grandma time. I'm guided by grandma all the time.
Yes.
And it's not just my grandma, it's all kind of grandmas.
Yes.
Jamaica got a song called Badass Grandmas. That's it. BAG, the new bag.
Put that on our outro music. But I'm interested in this writing in plurality, I guess, when you see the grandmas, when you see the Maliks, and I'm wondering if you could comment on what you're doing when you do that, when you have like a posse of Maliks, or you have a posse of grandmas performing certain work through time and for, well, as multiple speakers too, in a way.
I'm attempting to do the as above, so below with the cosmos into like seeds, tomatoes or whatever, and just going down that layering of thought. So, you know, my lexicon is that the cosmos is within our head as well. So it's different families of different galaxies and solar systems. So every now and then I'll either get visited by one of those extra terrestrials, or I'll go out to get some of them via meditation or heavy thought, or sitting in the garden like my grandma used to do. But I think that's a lot of what people were doing in their silence. So it's investigating that silence, since a lot of us are silent when we write. And then also treating the reader and myself the way I see the world. Everything's in communication all the time. It's just a matter of talking to somebody with the right vibe. So that's why they come in. Also, I just think it's entertaining to be, lots of conversations. You know what I mean? It's lots of things all the time. When Paris got quiet, there was nothing, and then there was everything. But it was a different kind of language, like 4%, you know?
Yes.
But it's like y'all, too. I include y'all. You know that. Y'all, when I'm reading, and like everyone whoever I'm around, I start including in the writing, because y'all in my brain. If you get in my brain, I'm going to put you on that page. Unless, of course, you meet me and be like, you know, I don't want to be on your page. I think it's very toxic that you're just suddenly putting us on the page. I'm through with your toxicity. I'm going to write a poem about you and yours. So you know what I'm saying? Like, I'll leave it alone. But I find all of us important. I find everything we're thinking about and doing important. And the reason the ancestors are important is because they took themselves and they took their time and they took their mind serious enough and their spirit serious enough to actually do something with it. And so since I'm not a you know, hero in that sense. All I can do is write it and record it. I'm a recorder. What we keep, I record things. I'm, you know, that's it. I'm basically on some amber at all times.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a little bit more interesting. And I think when you're on stage and when you have conversations with people that—
Yeah, me is, you know.
Well, yeah, but if you multiply them, then maybe the egotistical me is like dispersed and not as toxic. I don't know.
But it's all us. Oh, so what you were saying about ancestor, and I'm gonna stop after this, is we're our own ancestors. So when I was 7, and I was like, maybe I should put this pen down, or I should stop rapping because it's ridiculous, and my parents are embarrassed, and it's letting our race down to do this stupid rap stuff. And something was like, yo, do it anyway. Who was that? It wasn't my grandma. My grandma wasn't trying to hear me rap. That rap was awful. You know what I'm saying? So apparently I reached through time and got myself. You know what I'm saying? It's the same thing when certain people have certain, yeah, you get me. Just, I think we're also our own ancestor hollering at ourselves, and we pull ourselves through time. And in slave narrative style, if you fall out back there and them dogs start barking, yes, your ancestors was pulling you anyway, but something else gonna have to tell you to get up for them dogs to get you. You see what I'm saying? They was already helping you run away. You got to pull yourself up to keep running. So that's that.
Yes. Thank you, Malik.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
The tiniest merci I've ever heard you say.
I wasn't supposed to come out. I wasn't supposed to hear that.
Okay, thank you, Malik. Let's now move to our final guest tonight. We're going to be talking now with Jennifer Huang. Jennifer is currently in Maryland, but has just received her M.F.A. from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I guess it's called the Helen Zell's Writers Program. She is a co-poetry editor for Sundog Lit, and she has had some of her essays and poetry published in Narrative Magazine, the Rumpus, Michigan Quarterly Review, and a few other places. She is a wonderful poet of nature and of contemplation. And then I just saw one of her poems published on Underblong, and so it seems that she also can write about a lot of things. Maybe you can go check out her poem on Underblong. But Jennifer, please join us, and hello, and I know you've been here, but let's start talking about, I'm not sure exactly what piece you'll be reading, but you said you wanted to open with something, so I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, sorry, I'll lean closer. Thank you so much, Carrie and Marissa, Manderley Collective, and all the readers. I feel really grateful to be here and hearing everyone's words on ancestry. I feel really like at home, and a lot is coming together for me in my mind. I know I said I was going to open with something, but I sort of changed things, and if it's okay, I wanted to read a poem of mine that was inspired by a Taiwanese folk tale, I suppose, that I read in this compilation called Yao Guai Taiwan. It's sort of an anthology of ghost, monster, and spirit stories. And I took inspiration from one of the stories, which was about a Taoist monk on the coast of Taiwan, who saw a deer walking, and the deer turned into a shark. And that story, magical in and of itself, it really stuck with me. And the monk, he said, he was wondering if that was, he said, is this the way that spirit practices the Tao? And I don't know, I think that question really resonated with me, especially in thinking of the ways that ancestry, spirituality, and ritual all sort of intermingle and coexist together. So I'm going to read this poem. I lost it on my computer. Let me try to find it. Oh, here it is. It's called Gaze, Moon to Sun. The way the light swayed on my sheet, I decided to walk to the beach, a sliver of silver sparking the path, a crinkle behind me. I searched for signs of life fiercer than I, the beast that lurked from land to sea to land. My eyes imagined shadows from shadows until I spotted the source, a deer, marked with scars, a sika, walking to the edge of the earth. Each step was a prayer. He bowed and I sighed. The wind shifted and he twisted to look me in my heart, then dove into the water, antlers soaring to the heavens. His front legs leaped, elegance painting the sky. I blinked and his tail became an arced fin flipping into the sea. Flash. Yes, not fully one or the other, but half of each. The deer became a shark. I stayed with the deer shark as he waded out into the Pacific. He caught waves like I used to catch my father on soft lift mornings before the sound of the day. I would skip across the creaky steps. As I got closer to the basement, incense slowly stung the tip of my nose. My father prayed. I saw he was giving his soft away, to worship and be worshipped. I wanted ceremony like that. Dawn arrived like a salty breeze. I breathed back to my body, to the deer shark, the shore. I couldn't see him anymore. The shape shifted to fit the morning. I had seen him. He turned into the sun. He had seen me too. Thank you for the silent clap.
It is pretty phenomenal, I guess. I don't know if we'll be nostalgic for these days, but it's interesting. Jennifer, I guess hearing you introduce this poem of yours and then to think about the inspiration and that you take up, it seems the same creatures or creatural forms of the deer and the shark. It's, I guess, for me at least, these are forms that would be far, I guess, in such disassociation, I guess, as far as habitat in our assumptive powers, as if we're reading the sentence and we're waiting for the next thing. I won't jump from deer to shark, but it's corporal. It also might be mental. When you're writing this, I guess there's also this relationship between the speaker and the father that's kind of interesting, approaching these animal spirits. Is this ancestry for you when you think about it and the way that you're writing about it in the poem? Does it have a corporal effect, this transformation? Is it more something about instincts that are connected, but I guess that we're able to be in tune with through different experience? Or
yeah, I think that's a really good question. That is maybe a bit difficult to answer, but I definitely think yeah, I think there's an interesting, what struck me most about this story is yeah, these two creatures coming together in that you wouldn't normally associate, like land and water, and also sort of the softness of the deer, and then also the more fierceness of the shark, but of course the shark is more than that. And this being a creature being able to be both, whether real or not, it opened this new door for me to explore, I think. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, but I mean, the question was, I was thinking because, well, I didn't, the poem was a new listen for me. So it was, you know, trying to trace this well, what you're offering as inspirational piece that you told us about, and then also tracing some of what you put together in the progression of your lines. But yes, I think that answers, and it's nice also that you brought in the question of texture, I guess, and the way the corporal would or experience of a body could at moments be tender and soft, and then others could be fierce or related to when we're damaged, or if we've endured violence, there might be a side that could engage with other activities, and then where tenderness comes out in experience as well. I don't know. I do know that I haven't read all of your thesis, but I do know that, well, in this poem, and then I think in some of your other work that I've seen, there is a particular connection to nature. And I wanted to see if you could talk to us a little bit about that. This poem takes place in some sort of natural environment. How does that, is there something about the natural world that feels really opportune for relating or talking with past, present, or other times?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was very interesting and useful for me to hear Fork talk about the foregrounding of writing with, and as opposed to, or like thinking of that like balancing, or I don't know, comparing that to writing to and for. And I think for me, nature does play a really strong part in my writing. I think more so than I can even imagine right now. And all of that comes from my Taiwanese background. When the Portuguese first saw the land, they named it Formosa, which means beautiful island. And so there was already in that history that foregrounding of the lusciousness of the land, the weather, the mountains, the sea. And so, of course, that's going to come through and really be ingrained within my writing and how I relate to Taiwan. And I think also one writer who I was going to open with and speak to, who's one of my favorite Taiwanese poets, is Huang, and he writes about his hometown, Huang. And he said in an interview how much he wanted to make that hometown, that place, more than just a physical presence, to like bring it into perhaps the spiritual realm, or speaking more to how humans relate to their land. And I think that when I read that, that resonated with me, and is something that I look up to and work towards as a writer.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you were starting to tell us a little bit about, I guess, your relationship with a specific Taiwanese ancestry, maybe some things that you've looked for that perhaps have been in your family life as a young person. When I spoke to you, I guess, about this event, you had mentioned that you wanted to maybe bring in some of that ancestry, but you also mentioned that maybe with that, I guess we've decided maybe it's not 2 or 4, but with that you wanted to talk about something that was non-human ancestry. And I think you've said a lot already about maybe your relationship with nature, but you've just mentioned, I guess, a difference between the physical that Young Mu is maybe helping you realize that would move beyond that into a spiritual realm. I guess, could you talk a little bit, and I'm going to first say, I think maybe could you mention maybe how you understand the spiritual as maybe non-human, or maybe I'm misunderstanding sort of what you meant. Do you think it's a part, or do you think, like, are we collaborating with it, or is it a part of us, or?
I think it's definitely a collaboration, but when I think of the non-human, I also think of the lives that they have that are separate from human interaction. The mountains were there before we were there, and they had lives apart from how we see and view and use them. And so I think, yeah, when I'm writing, of course I have a relationship to these natural forces, but it's almost like I want to try to see them in their fullness, even if I can only begin to imagine what that might be like.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So you're talking about a time that predates us, or doesn't it concern, you know, maybe what some parts of the world were enjoying while we've been in lockdown. The conversations that are happening about us.
Yeah, and it's almost that question of time too, like the point in which there's like this encounter. It's everything up until that point. It's not just that thing. I'm also thinking of Malik when he's saying like we are our ancestors and the different me's, like there are all these different lives and histories going on at once. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you, Jennifer, for, I guess, adding to this. I mean, we had mentioned the spiritual, we had mentioned the natural world, but it's really interesting to think about, and maybe it's present in the work. I think it is actually in some of the work of some of the other participants tonight, but it's kind of a nice way to maybe go out to forget the weight of self and to be listening more, perhaps. I don't know. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Malik. Thank you, Che. I'm just going by the faces so I don't forget. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you, Fork. I'm not sure if she's still with us. Have I mentioned everybody? But also thank you to Manderley Collective and specifically to Marissa for inviting Verse of April. I'm going to conclude with that, I guess. I don't know if Manderley Collective wants to say anything, but thank you so much.
Thank you all for everything. I'm floored by and swimming in your intelligence and philosophical and spiritual musings and just all that you've gifted us with this evening for you, afternoon for us. I am just speechless and in love, so thank you again for this. It's been recorded. I'll pass whenever we get it all kind of finalized, it on to Carrie to pass on to you all. And it's been a real, true, absolute honor this evening to be in the presence of you all and your creative spirits. Thank you. I'll wrap us up and log us off. Have a good evening, a good night to you all in Paris, and have a lovely rest of your evening to those of us here stateside. So thank you again. See you all.